the hotel world has had this technology for hundreds of years, and for some reason the BTR and the co-living world don't seem to pick it up. And it's like, well...
But the hotel technology is all built on whole buildings, whereas what you find in the short-term rental industry is the technology is built on individual units.
Yeah.
And so it actually works. The whole architecture is different. And so, even, you can read articles in Skift about how those two technology ecosystems are different. But I think there are opportunities for them to come together over time. I mean, certainly what we're finding with Trusted Stays, for example, is that we essentially have to build that connectivity so that we bundle what comes out of our industry to go into the GDS, because the GDS only works on buildings.
Yeah.
And so it's that translation, which is from two different architectures, which is why, yes, hotel world has lots of great systems, but they don't work on an individual unit basis. And that architecture has to change in order for these two worlds to talk to each other.
Yeah, I guess it's about how you use them. I mean, we've got 228 actual apartments in Birmingham, and we have a hotel system running them. I think the difference that actually we talk about is that over a 12-month period, the same apartment could be short-term, could be long-term, could be short-term, could be actually long-term again. It doesn't have to be you take off actually 2 floors of your building actually for short-term lets. And then if you then manage the building, like actually we've just done with the Commonwealth Games, we actually ran down 150 actually leases and put them all in the short-term market, £300 a night, and then you put them back in the actual long-term market again. But Opera, which is our system, for the actual long-term market, it just classifies the apartment as a room, and then that then gives you all your data, all your guest history, everything else, and then the short-term. But then Opera, that automatically links into actually GDS, automatically actually links into the key system. So it's a case of actually how you use it.
The challenges for a lot of the distribution channels in our market is that the amount of amenities and the details you need to have are far more than what Opera drives into those channels. So, look, that's where I think on all sides there's going to be innovation.
That's the point. I think the point I'm making is that we've got to keep talking, because, it's not about being in isolation or being in competition. It's about trying to improve the market, trying to improve the offer. Because my challenge is probably the same as yours, in that you go and talk to actually developers and they're like, not doing short-term let, I'm being burned with Airbnb. I mean, we've got the whole piece going on right now actually about planning. I mean, how many actual developers have actually got planning for short-term lets? Because it's a different planning price.
But it doesn't have to be outside of London. But anyway, I think they've got our mics on, which isn't really helpful.
No. Just thinking that. Yes, they were. Yeah, because they're all over there. You might have to spin around a little bit.
Anybody had a discount over here?
Should we move them or?
Who wants to see us? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, we'll just see how full we are.
I think you've made a decision. Guess we should forward a little bit. We're talking.
That's noisy. Wonder if we've got a gong.
We need a little cowbell.
Or, we can do a sound bath.
It's because the cake's come out just before, so that's the difficulty.
Let's hope the sugar high lasts just after our session. I moderated the panel just before lunch, and that's when everybody's getting a bit hangry, and now we've got the sugar. What's the time check? Shall we start? Did anybody see any loiterers hanging around the door that were sort of like hovering, thinking they might come in? Come on in. Right, I think we might kick off. Now, we were considering doing a little bit of a yoga move to ask those who are at that end of the room to come down this end. unless you're comfortable there. Can you see okay, everybody? Oh, that's kind. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Free
All we
chairs.
ask for is
Yay.
a marginal shift. That's all it takes. All right. Thanks very much. Lovely to see you all. Thanks very much for joining us today. Today we are talking about essentially corporate and flexible rents, and we have the whole sort of spectrum. We've got industry representatives for Trusted Stay. Marilee's here, and you can all introduce yourself as we go, but basically we're sort of looking at operations, strategy, valuation, the whole sort of asset life cycle, if you like, that goes into operating our assets, and then how short let and corporate lets can, we can do some, maybe potentially some really interesting strategic stuff around this, because there might be some more barriers to entry than some people realize, but also more opportunity. So I'll start my far right. Sogol, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see a relatively full room. So if you haven't met me before, you've been lucky to date. My name is Sogol. I'm the Managing Director of Way of Life. So we operate on behalf of the private equity firm. We've got over 1,000 apartments under management, another 500 to open, and another 3,000 in a pipeline. So we are growing, and we are very excited to be here.
And just before I go on, Sogol, does Way of Life use short stays at the moment? Short stay? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
we use different models to date.
Okay, we'll talk about that. Then we've got John Angus.
Hi, I'm John Angus. I'm the Managing Director of Switch Hospitality. We are a hotel actual management company. We've got about 1,000 actual hotel rooms that we look after in Birmingham. And we've got into the BTR and PRS and actual co-living sector as we were asked to look after 228 apartments and also some actual serviced offices. And when we got into that market, we actually realised that actually a hotel operator could make actually a pretty good difference. So again, we'll talk about that actually a bit later.
Thank you very much. Marilee?
So I'm Marilee Carr. I basically wear two hats. I'm the chair of the Short-Term Accommodation Association, which is the industry association for short-term and flexible rentals. And I'm also CEO and founder of Trusted Stays.
And what are Trusted Stays?
And Trusted Stays is the industry platform for corporate and government bookings. And we partner together with the Short-Term Accommodation Association and the UK Apartment Association to open up the market for corporate rentals and hopefully drive commercial value for the membership of both associations.
Perfect. James?
Hello, I'm James Hind. I head up the fund valuation teams in CBRE. So I predominantly specialise in build to rent and the valuation of all those assets. So.
And James just whispered to me that he was a first timer on a panel. So let's give it.
Absolutely.
Let's show him what it's.
And I'm a valuer as well, so that will bore you all to tears as well, I'm sure. But
Right. So just so we've got a bit of perspective, I'm just going to ask for a bit of audience participation, just so we know who the panel is speaking to and vice versa. So those in the operator space, show of hands. Good. Those in the short let space. Okay. Developer, funder space, and then valuation. You can say whatever you like.
believe everything I say.
Okay, and then one last category. Anybody in planning here? No. Okay. Again, we can make it up as we go along. No, just joking. All right. So today we're going to sort of talk about valuation, touch a little bit on planning, I think, operations, definitely, technology, and obviously the corporate rentals sector. So, you know, there's huge opportunity, I think, in this, in short lets that hasn't yet been tapped into, and it has been used in different guises in the sector for a long time, not necessarily as an organised initiative, but obviously there's huge value in it. You know, Sogol, you've mentioned that. So let's start with that. So Sogol, as an operator, what are the strategic opportunities that you see to improve the performance of developments through flexible short lets?
Yeah, I think we've been using the short-term lets. I think that everybody's using different terminology when it comes to short-term lets. Some people are referring to it as a void filling, some people are using it as part of their strategy, or some people are actually going to offer that as a choice of tenure as well in their building. So we have done all of those models, and I think that we were introduced to it probably when COVID hit. I think that was the time that everybody started thinking about what should we do? We got a void. We need to do something with the number of available units, and I think that was the time that we started looking at that option. And then we look at different models in terms of if we are just letting them out, so we factor in as like a long term, if we are going to have people who are going to lease it from us, or are we going to go through the model that we're going to hear a lot more today, and that means that you work with a platform that they are very professional and they can help you in terms of generating income. So I think in terms of what value is adding, we've seen a huge take-up, and I think there are two angles to it. One is to provide additional income to your investors, and then the other option would be to provide choice to your customers that they might not have that choice because they have to either sign a 6 months tenancy or a 12 months tenancy to be able to live in your building.
And just to be clear, do you insource yours or do you outsource it for the short?
So we use Hosperia as a platform, so they will do all of our advertising, but then we will look after all the cleaning and all of those things which comes with the operation. But I guess people have a choice if they want to do it in-house or outsource it as well. But we do in-house, but we use Hosperia in terms of advertising the rooms.
But the actual occupant, do you look after them, or does Hosperia look after them?
We do look after them, but what we will do with Hosperia is that they will just vet the guest for us. So we have certain rules that we say we would like these type of people to stay with us. This is a minimum stay for us. So we will work with them, and then as soon as they pay what I call a nightly rate, we will be looking after them in terms of greeting them, doing everything with the cleaning, checking out and checking in.
Okay, and you've got different geography, which we'll come on to maybe a little bit later. So, Marilee, as chair of the Short-Term Accommodation Association, that's an easy one to say, what do you see as the opportunities in the market, and what's prevented more convergence to date? Like, why don't we see more of it across the sector?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a couple of things. If I think back to 2019, I remember sitting in a room in Berlin for the International Hotel Investment Forum and talking to a bunch of hoteliers who were like, oh, short-term rentals are just alternative accommodation. It's not a really big deal. Fast forward to now, and estimates are that 20% of accommodation is now short-term or flexible rentals, and that's globally. So that's the journey that we've gone on. If we look at the overall hospitality and accommodation market, I would predict now that by 2025 we'll see flexible rentals being mainstream in the entire build to rent and multifamily industry. So I think that same journey is, a couple of years behind, but very quickly catching up. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. The first one is because customers want it. Sogol alluded to it. Customers might come and say, well, I just want to rent a place for 3 months, and then I'll see how it goes. There's people who are looking for, digital nomad types of things. I want to go to a city, spend 3 months there. Well, it's really hard to rent a place to live if that's what you're looking for. So there's a big opportunity to capitalize on that. Arguably, the regulators are going in the other direction and trying to make everything longer tenancies, but we'll leave that to aside for a second. But I think the other opportunity is, looking at the types of clients that Build to Rent are trying to attract. So how to access those corporate markets. Which is why we've come together as an industry to have a platform so that we can do that in one single way through Trusted Stays. But also, importantly, there's some big issues that we need to crack around valuations. You know, to date, you can get a hotel valuation or you can get a resi valuation. Both of those models exist, but why don't they exist in one model? And I think that's where, again, as an industry, we can start to crack those things so that the lenders, the owners, everyone can better understand what those opportunities are strategically, and whether the right mix in one development might be 10% and in another development might be 30. And so I think figuring those out, and then looking at the technology that we need to deliver it, so how to get access to the right channels to market, and then manage it, which is very different than your traditional resi management technology, and the partnerships across our two industries. So making sure that the knowledge and the expertise comes from the industry that has that ability to deliver it, and then working in those partnerships, whether it is a combination of technology and operations or fully outsourcing it to someone else who does everything end to end. So I think there's a whole range of things that have prevented it from being more mainstream, but I think as an industry, we're tackling those together. And I think there's huge opportunities if we think that PwC estimates this market to be worth about $330 billion by 2025.
That's quite a big figure in just 3 years. What is it worth now? Do we know?
Skift reckons that globally it's worth about 156 billion. I mean, you get different figures, but for me, the main thing is it's pretty big.
That's more than doubling in 3 years. I mean, that's very impressive. And okay, so just before we go into the valuation point, because there's quite a lot to unpack there or unpick there for James, but John, just on the broader picture, what do you think is changing in the external environment or in the external world right now that makes this topic relevant for build to rent? I know it's not necessarily your mainstay, but obviously you observe the changes and build to rent specifically, which is what we're all in.
Yeah. Well, I think as a hotel operator coming into the BTR market, we've sort of come into it very different because part of our group, we're building an hotel in Birmingham, 161 apartments that will be opening actually next year. And in the actual hotel market over the last 2 years, what you're finding is that actual hotels are building actual serviced apartments in their buildings. So, you know, as a hotel company, we've already actually recognised that, you know, in Birmingham, we have about 30,000 corporate customers staying in our properties every year. And actually, if you went and asked them very honestly, would you rather stay in an apartment or a 25 actual square metre hotel bedroom, which one would you rather have? The answer is probably an apartment. So we got customers that are actually staying with us because they don't have any other choice other than another actual hotel, which is why, as a hotel operator, we're building our own actual serviced apartments to house actually those guests. And that's what's happening everywhere. If you go and take a look at cities all over the UK, you've got actually Staybridge actual suites, you've got Marriott actual residencies, all coming to the cities on top of a standard Marriott or on top of a standard Indigo. So when we then come into the BTR market, we're like, well, hang on a minute, we already do this. We already have 30 corporate people selling in the UK for all these 30,000 bedrooms. We already have all these clients. We already have actual hotel systems. We already have actually GDS. We can switch on a building actually tomorrow and start to actually service it. And then when people are saying to us, well, really what operators buildings actually should do is take 2 floors of the stock and use that for short term and then take the rest of the and separate, we think the complete opposite. Our view is that it's a bedroom and we run a 2-year calendar, and across a 2-year calendar an apartment could be sold for 3 weeks, could be sold for 6 months, and it will flip back and forwards based upon the actual demand. And it doesn't matter where it is in the building. And where we believe our actual USP in that market is because we only put that system into buildings that actually we manage. So ultimately, we have a hotel team, and we have to be able to check the guest in. We have to be able to take the booking, check the guest in, and take the guest on the journey with trained hotel team members. And that's actually switched. So when you look at what's happening just now in the environment, exactly as just been said, people want flexibility. But what also, because this is all so new, when actually we arrive in the market and we already have all these things, it's like, well, there needs to be, actually with respect, a level of taking that detail and sharing it. You know, for example, our developers currently now actually dealing with the difference between VAT and council tax. You know, are actual developers talking about, do they have the right actual planning to be able to do actually short-term lets outside of London? Are they looking at the actual insurance piece? Because ultimately, if you sell a whole pile of rooms which are paying actual VAT, as a developer, you can then claim back on your council tax. But who's doing that? So for us, these actual environmental points about saying, look, you get the systems in that can make it work, but the point I've been making all the way along to the BTR market is that, if you don't catch up, the actual hotel industry are going to take over. Because when we open our apartments in Birmingham, our first hit is to all of the actual BTR operators. And we'll go to all those operators and go to all those tenants and say, do you want total flexibility? Would you rather pay actual VAT? You don't have to pay a deposit, and you've got all that basis. So for me, it's trying to go to people and say, listen, this is happening, and it's happening in bits. And what actually we found with a great self-respect is that there's a lot of people who are placing actually these bookings. I mean, actually, we took over a building, and the short-term customers were picking their keys up in a bin room. And they would arrive and they'd pick their keys up in a bin room, and they weren't checked in, they wouldn't see anybody. And then what happens? Hen party, stag party, damage in the building. The developer, kick them all out. Whereas flip that around and say, well, listen, our biggest hotel in Birmingham does 100,000 guests per year. Our team are used to checking people in, checking people out. They're used to dealing with these issues. And as long as you do it properly, I believe it's a massive market.
There's a lot of synergies between hospitality, hotels, and build to rent, and usually it's just around the differences are less than the similarities, but a lot of the differences come around in terms of the length of stays, but the regulation, certainly in terms of health and safety, but also just in terms of planning. And then, of course, the systems that are designed for this. And we probably have a bit of a structural issue in terms of that starts with planning and does start with valuation. And we could unpick so much about this because there's also community, which is a huge part of build to rent. But we might come towards that towards the end. But I want to give James his maiden voyage on his panel, his first ever panel. No, just joking. So let's talk about, I mean, you are the valuation expert in the room, completely unchallenged, which is great. And we're talking about, valuation. Obviously, you need evidence, and the models are usually quite siloed, which is then, to an extent, dictated by the underwrites that are accepted by investors and so forth. Talk to us about some examples you've seen, or some challenge. What are the challenges to potentially being able to capitalize on creating mixed models, which could satisfy not just consumers, because the choice about, I don't know, I'm going to need a short-term let shortly because I'm renovating a house, or, we saw a lot of it in COVID. People needed to go and care for somebody for a 3-month period, whatever it is. But that growth in that short-term option, combined with the long-term planning and structures that we have, and then obviously the established valuation models.
Yeah, I think we know that the valuation models are very different. Build to rent is very much predicated off, a gross income. I'm not trying to bore everyone to tears straight off the bat, but gross income, that derives, once we can see gross income being proven within a particular asset, that helps us derive what our opinion of gross market rent is. We then apply an operational expenditure deduction. That gets us to our NOI, and we apply a net yield. That's how we value build to rent. Net income capitalisation basically Hotels is completely different, and I won't profess to be an expert in hotel valuations, but it is more often than not a 10-year DCF, you know, with an exit cap rate or whatever. And the problem is that we're valuing a C3 use type of asset, and obviously hotels or short stays or whatever you might want to call it kind of straddles, is it C1 or is it sui generis or that sort of type of thing. And I think that the problem that we have is that there is such a huge lack of evidence, both in terms of rental evidence but also investment evidence. And that's essentially, as you say, what we need in order to, one, get ourselves comfortable with the valuation process, but then also prove to our clients that we kind of know what we're talking about and that we can justify their underwrites or whatever. I think, you know, the other point, I suppose, in terms of sort of challenges, I guess there's a small percentage of, we know there's a small percentage of lettings within a particular scheme, which typically are short lets. If we get that information, then we can kind of assess it, but it is typically a really small percentage. And as Sobel's kind of already highlighted, you know, there were schemes which we saw perhaps sort of during 2020 and 2021 where there was the use of short-term lets in order to help boost occupancy, particularly in central London. You know, when occupancy there dipped to sort of, you know, anywhere between sort of 60-70% from some of our records. So it can obviously be a useful sort of thing to employ, but the difficulty is trying to get that information, I suppose.
Yeah.
Can I just very quickly help you with that one? In that, I think that's exactly the point that actually we found, and I think that, pardon me mentioning your competition, but we've got a scheme where actually we're working with JLL, and the short-term actually weekly rental that was put forward for the site, when we then sat down and applied a 20% short-term income, the actual weekly rental went up by 30%. So it took quite some time, but now that agency have accepted a double actual P&L model actually for valuation. And I think it's about, as you said, sharing that data. It's sharing the data that says these are the average rates, these average rates. There's a system in the actual hotel world called SDR. And SDR is basically a measurement of the entire city, and it tells you what the average rate, the occupancy, and what's called actually RevPAR, so the profit. So every actual, every hotel company signs up to it across all of Europe. So you could sit down in London, for example, and take an area, and you could pull the SDR data, and it will tell you that the average rate per night is £100, the occupancy is this. That then backs up the P&L actually with your corporate actual demand. So you then say, right, well, we've got all these customers that, you know, actually have demand. Here's the rate, here's the occupancy that the competition are getting. We would want to move that into our building, but it is getting back to the two actual revenue stream models and actually one cost model in the middle where you blend at the top. So you've got your blended P&L, two banks of revenue, one bank of cost, and then that's your one bottom line profit. But
No,
it is sharing it.
I think the exciting thing is that you know, our industry has tons of data now. We did a global pilot with STR and have been working with them at an industry level. But we also have data providers in our sector, and we've got technology providers who have a lot of data, so that whenever there's a scheme, we're often able to work together with those owners, operators, etc., to be able to forecast out what it would look like based on real data. And I think this is really the opportunity, is to be working together with the JLLs, the CBREs, and everyone of this world to build those models so that as an industry, we've got something that everybody can rely on, that has a clear methodology, and that everyone can call on. So I think everyone's open to that, because I think we're now in a world where that data exists, and we can start to deploy it in those mixed models.
Yeah, and I mean the theory of it is sound for sure. It's around the challenges of actually the evidence. So somebody has to sort of take the first step. So getting the right valuation and the lenders on board is obviously key for a model like this. what are the other elements that we haven't talked about that operators need to consider when looking at the opportunity?
So I think you mentioned a very good point in relation to your gross rent and the net position, because sometimes you're just thinking, okay, I'm going to let these 2 units, I'm going to get this amount in average, this will be the occupancy. But what you don't calculate is that other costs around your utility, your council tax, your bed sheets, your cleaning, coffee, tea, all of those elements that you will see in any short-term let. So you need to do your homework. So we've done, a huge exercise around making some assumptions that if it's 40% or if 50% let, if we get this figure per, night, what will be the bottom line before we make a final decision that this is the route. At the end of the day, the valuer would like to see the same rental figure or maybe slightly higher than that if you're taking the risk. I think the other challenge is if you want to look at this option, you need to also factor in that you are operating in a build-to-rent environment. We're very proud of this as a community led, and it's about community engagement. So for people who are coming and leaving 2-3 days, what they will see is that lots of luggage, turning up in the reception, and then they disappear, few new people. So again, from outset, you need to be very clear about what you're doing, which, if you wanted to consider 10, 20, make sure they are on the same floor. And I think something that we also need to be mindful for the guests is that if we're putting them next to the amenity spaces, what's going to happen to them? Because we will have lots of events, and they want to have, a nice, sleep, and they want to go to bed at 10 o'clock, and we're running the events till 11 o'clock. So these are some of the operational challenges that we all need to be mindful of.
They might be the party animals.
They might be the party animals as well,
They're
but it's
leading-
just
they're
that
leading the
exactly.
demographic
But I
aspect.
think you need to have, as you mentioned, John, in terms of you need to make sure you have the right staff and they know what they're doing, because at the end of the day, it's the experience, it's your reputation, it's the review that they're leaving for you.
And I think that there is the potential, well, I know there's potential to vet the type of demographic that you want in these communities, which is one of the benefits of being able to use platforms where you can vet essentially to make sure we might want the party animals, but we might not. We've got 10 minutes to go, so I'm conscious we're going to ask some questions. So do put your hand up if you've got a question. In the meantime, I just want to turn back to James. Are there examples that you've seen? Do you think this is possible in terms of, would you like to see this happen?
If you want the brutally honest answer, there's really quite limited evidence of it. I know John's mentioned JLL have obviously seen an opportunity. I know that there's an asset which was previously the collective asset in Canary Wharf, which was brought out of administration, is now operated as a sort of quasi long let, short let. So there is evidence of it. The problem is the stuff that certainly that we're valuing at the moment, it's not very well broadcasted. And I think, as to Sobel's point, yes, it does, having short-term lets does boost your net operating income, and that's fantastic. But then I think your gross rental income, but you've then also got to consider what impact that has on operational expenditure. And the problem is as a valuer, rather boring as it seems, that's quite helpful to us in terms of justifying our numbers. And at the end of the day, we need to have that visibility. So it's having that dialogue with the likes of Merrily, I suppose, and saying, look, can you, and Sobel saying, what can you show us that can get us comfortable with this position? Can I see, other examples? Well, there have been examples of assets which we value. It's very asset and location specific, obviously. So particularly London, if I focus predominantly on London, if we know that a particular location is popular with corporate short-term lets or whatever, that means that we will focus more of our due diligence on speaking to those local agents and saying, can you help us here? What evidence are we seeing? Is there a demand pool here for this type of letting? If there is, that can get us comfortable. We can build those rents into our valuation models and sort of apply that sort of benefit to the valuation. But it is all about sort of those discussions with agents, and as we've kind of already touched upon a few times, it's just visibility, of which the build to rent sector, being in a relatively nascent, I don't like you to use the word nascent because it's not really nascent anymore. It's a sort of maturing market, but there's compared to other real estate sectors, there's no visibility, and that's one of the biggest problems.
It's a bit of a challenge that agencies have got two different departments, isn't it? So when we were trying to convince JLL about a hotel P&L, it was a different department actually of JLL that were part of that conversation. So with the agent, again, this is just a fact, you have to talk to both departments to get the numbers, because it's the actual hotel team that understand the actual short-term income, and it's the BTR team that understand the BTR piece, and I think that's where we've got to try and bring that data. I mean, the thing with actually hotels that makes what just been mentioned there about actually operating is our whole culture is about actually measurement. I can tell you how many toilet rolls actually we use, how many soaps actually we use. We got a cost per room for everything. But we did a stat actually in Birmingham fairly recently that the average actual long-term rent is just over £1,000 in our apartments, but the short-term rent is £2,000. So if you're doubling the income, the cost is no more than actually 15% on that doubling. So, but it's about showing that data, improving it. But if we have, as I said, 1,000 bedrooms being sold in a hotel market, we have a PRS scheme, we have actually serviced office scheme, we just bring all those P&Ls, bring the feasibility and share it with you and try to actually provide the evidence to actually push the market forward.
Yeah, there's huge amounts of synergy and as I said before, opportunity, because you've also got student within the skill set and the capabilities and certainly the valuation, and that's one form of accommodation. Then you've got the co-living, which is designed for that sort of shorter gap stay sometimes. You've got hotels who are, rightly say, in the retail, generally an agency sitting in the retail living markets, and then obviously you've got build to rent, which is more long term and soon to be later living. I mean, we've got the full life cycle here, literally, and the spectrum. What an opportunity! But there is definitely some challenges around not just planning, valuation, systems, skill sets, and then also the communities themselves. I mean, I think we've got a great, fantastic opportunity, as well as some challenges. Question over here, gentlemen.
On the valuation side, I want to ask, when you look at a short stay, do you look at the cash flow do you look at the differences in cash flow, or is your consideration more about the operational issues? So as an operator, if say I go with a sublet model where I'm able to convince someone to take it off my hand on a TST and they then sublet or whatever, how would you look at that sort of thing?
Are you talking about a long let, like a headed lease, or are you just talking about like?
So I'm able to convince someone to take it off of my hand on a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year lease and
Sure.
they are subletting.
Headed tenancy.
But operationally, it is still a short let. So how would you look at that sort of a thing from valuation standpoint?
I think that again, if it's a one-off unit within a scheme, it's quite difficult. And you know, typically you're not going to see sort of build-to-rent schemes with leases being granted on individual flats anyway, because that's not attractive to investors. Typically, that would be a broken asset, unbroken. Most investors are interested in unbroken blocks. They don't want buildings where they don't have full control over them. I think in terms of the sort of the short let sort of question, I mean, again, that's another good point. I suppose, yes, in London you have the 90-day rule, and it allows you to, I don't want to get into planning too much, but it allows you to kind of, in London at least, grant short lets without planning permission. But obviously, in other locations around the UK, that's difficult, and it depends on whatever your planning authority in those locations are happy to accept. It also, if you're a leaseholder, more often than not, there's a clause in your lease turning around and telling you that you can't do a short let, so you can't sublet your flat, basically. So there's sort of those sorts of roadblocks in the way for that type of thing.
I guess, James, the difference will be if there is a corporate let. So that will be the option. So you have a corporate let, and as you've mentioned, they will take it off your hands. But then there is a steady income, so you don't see a difference between that one and a permanent tenancy.
We do see that from student operators. So we value a number of PRS schemes in London. They're our clients, the freeholder, but they grant an overriding lease to an operator such as that, and then our methodology then is we can drop down our assumption on OPEX because it's less management intensive, but your yield is probably going to be softer because you're tied in for that sort of 5-year period. So,
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, Tracy, I'll come to you next.
Operationally, how do you think about if you've got a kind of blend of short, and especially build-to-rent developments where it's mostly along your backfill, having them available on that kind of more turnkey for the short lets versus the probably less services included on the longer stays, sort of flexing back and forth between them in terms of how much, I don't know what the operational intensity is in terms of getting them ready as you go back and forth between the two models.
So it depends a little bit. So I think in the industry, what you'll see is that, again, to Sogal's point, it's deciding how much of that operations you want to do yourself as the build-to-rent operator versus how much you want to partner with a company from our industry that can actually do that for you. Of course, it also depends a little bit on how you set your own parameters. With the likes of Vertis and Canary Wharf Group, we've seen where they set 7-night minimums. You're not having in and out every day, those types of things. And when you use platforms like Trusted Stays and you're attracting corporate tenants, then it's much more about longer stays, relocations, and also kind of getting people into the development to see it and hopefully actually convert to long-term stays. So I think the long and the short of it is there are more operational complexities, so you need to think about whether you want to do that yourself or whether you want someone else who's an expert. But then once you've made that decision, then it's about together with that partner or with your team figuring out what are those parameters and how you want to manage it. And that may depend a little bit on your location, on the type of asset that you have, etc. And I think that's where working together with experts in the industry, you can actually gain some insight from what others have done and learn how to manage that in the best way so that it isn't just, the kind of Airbnb, we tried it and it was a disaster experience that some have had. And instead, it can actually be a really good experience that drives the right types of people into your development.
I think as well you need to have, as you say, it's having the right partner to actually deliver it for you. Because ultimately, you need to have enough mass to justify the staffing. So it comes down to planning the system, and you'll find lots of BTR companies now are employing actually hotel teams, actual hotel experience. And those guys are used to that actual flexibility. Actual housekeeper can do 10 apartments in a day, so you try to actually have 10 apartments come up in a day that are actually ready to be cleaned all together. But again, it's planning and organising, and that's what our teams are used to actually doing. So it's having the right people operate it. Too many people, unfortunately, try to do it without the experience, and then they end up with can't get the staff, can't clean, don't have the mass. So I think that is actually totally right. You have to have the right partner.
We're getting a call for end of session, but so Tracy, quick one.
Yeah, okay. So reputationally, our sector's kind of coming under pressure about housing supply, and there have been concerns raised about Airbnb and the number of kind of potential homes that are being taken out of circulation for short-term let. So that's kind of a real live issue that we're having to counter. We're also looking down the kind of telescope potentially at rent controls, which is going to damage our income. So potentially there's a solution here with you that we can kind of temper the impact of rent control by doing more short-term lets. But how do you answer that first question about are you depriving the wider populace of homes?
I mean, look, I'll take that sort of from the regulatory and industry perspective. What is clear is the number one reason why there aren't enough homes is because government hasn't helped to build enough homes. So let's leave that aside for 1 second. What we're likely to see are regulations coming in like registration, which helps to make fully transparent the activity that's happening. As an industry association, we're working closely with government, DCMS and DLUC on what those regulations might look like. But I think what's key is helping them to understand that This isn't about just having lots of tourists come and stay and go. Actually, what we're doing is we're catering for people who need more flexible living options. And that was the disconnect I was kind of alluding to early on, is that government thinks everybody wants a 5-year contract, when actually what you see in young people is they'd be much happier to sign up for 3 months and see how it goes. And so that disconnect is, I think, where this opportunity really lies, and that's in working together and how we communicate to the regulators and to government around how we're playing a role in filling that need for housing in a much more flexible way.
Yeah, I think there's something about the rhetoric and the optics of what we're trying to achieve is not actually about taking away housing. It's about providing more choice for those who need it in that small sliver of the market. I've got the double end of session now. So unfortunately, as much as we'd like to talk some more, please thank Sogol, John, Marilee and James for their insights.